Hey, everybody. Welcome back to your Dawn of Drones podcast. I'm Dawn Zoldi, your host and the CEO of P3 Tech Consulting. We are in the month of March dedicated to future industry, and there's no group and honestly no person I can think of better to talk to about this subject than the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma and James Grimsley, who we have here today on the show. So excited to finally have James on the show. So great to see you, James.
Yeah, great to see you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, great. And I know you got in your background there your Daisy Ranch, right? A picture of where all the magic happens out there. We're going to talk quite a bit about. Before we dive deep into everything that Choctaw is doing, I know a lot of folks out there. By the way, those that are out there, we are live, so don't forget to add your questions in the chat. Give us positive encouragement. Tell us where you're coming in from. But let's give a good overview, a high-level overview first. And I think we have a video to do that. And James, why don't you walk us through what we're going to see here?
Sure. Yeah, the Choctaw Nation is building a really pretty innovative aviation test facility. We have tribal-owned properties, 44,600 acres, very large, 25 miles long. And it's very rare that you have any sort of a landowner that owns that much contiguous property. So we're able to do things that are really only possible typically within the military, and that is control ground risk. So we can completely control ground risk for aviation testing, and we're building out different mitigation layers to address air risk. So we're building something that's sort of like the next best thing to a military test range. You know, we don't have special use airspace, but we're doing the best we can by adding these multiple layers of technical mitigations for air risk. The property is very pristine. It's as you've been able to visit and see it. It's a very beautiful property, a lot of diverse terrain over that 25 miles, and so it allows us to have all sorts of realistic scenarios. We have some really interesting valleys surrounded by hills, or like geographically bounded, and we were able to do quite a bit of testing. We have pretty much persistent companies out here now that are here all the time. We have a couple today flying, and it's been really fun to build this out of literally nothing. We started with just some property, and we've built something that's really pretty cool.
That's amazing. There's so many things in that video. It's so dense, in such a short time. It talks about the integration pilot program and the Beyond program, and the fact that you all were designated as the first PAO, right? The public aircraft operators. Thank you. Brain. My brain is so full of information for my Part 107 text next week. I can't remember acronyms, James. And no sleep too. Anyway, so what I want to do before we dive deep into all of those topics, tell us a little bit about the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, because I don't know that people fully appreciate the richness and the history and the culture of the nation. Can you give us a little background?
Sure. And my tie to the Choctaw Nation is that I grew up in the heart of the Choctaw Nation. Both sides of my family go back multiple generations, Choctaw cousins, both sides, and so I have a deep appreciation for the culture. But the Choctaw Nation really was the first tribe that's forcibly relocated into what is now modern day Oklahoma. So they were forcibly relocated from their ancestral homelands around Mississippi, Alabama, that area. The first relocation was in the 1830s. And so literally had to pick up everything they could carry and move. And it became known as the Trail of Tears. A lot of the Choctaws passed away, perished on the trail. Very, very difficult. But the character the Choctaw people really showed during that time, because as they were on the march, some of the soldiers told them about the famine going on in Ireland. And the Choctaws were so moved by it. They were just so worried that these people were starving that they raised $160. These were people that were being forcibly moved, had no money because they were being forcibly moved from the homeland. And they raised money and sent to Ireland. And so there's now a monument in Ireland it's called Kindred Spirits, a beautiful sculpture. And there's this kinship now with Ireland, and so we have a very good relationship with the Irish on that.
And St. Patrick's Day is Friday, so perfect
exactly.
timing. I mean, that's just such a
the engineering holiday, by the way.
I mean, it just shows the heart and the spirit of these folks. And by the way, everybody, I had the opportunity, the privilege, I'll say, to go out to Durant, Oklahoma, and visit with James and see the Daisy Ranch for myself. A beautiful cultural museum out there. I mean, if you haven't visited, you need to. It is just palpable. The effort and energy and love that was poured into that building and that tribute to the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. I will say the casino that we got to stay at. I go to Vegas a lot. Probably a lot of us do in this community because of commercial UAV and the conference there every year, and some other ones like CES. One of the most beautiful casinos I've ever seen, and just how from those roots and that, the Trail of Tears to what the nation has built itself into today and the way it gives back to others, it's just really breathtaking. So let's talk about the technology aspect, because, coming from this rich history and this giving, somewhere along the way, people thought, hey, drones are going to be a thing. We should get involved. So tell us that origin story with the technology aspect.
Yeah, at the time I was at, this was, around 2016, I was at the University of Oklahoma, Associate VP for Research, overseeing a lot of applied research there at the university. And I grew up with a lot of the people who are now leadership in the tribe. We were all kids together. And this is an area that was historically very impoverished. There was generational poverty and all the problems that come with that. But we all had a special kind of friendship and kinship growing up. And the tribe reached out to me and they said, we want to talk to you. Can you come visit us? And so I came down and they took me out on this property that they had acquired. They'd acquired this 44,000 acres from a very wealthy person who was going to build a private ranch. They changed their mind. So came out with them. We drove around and they showed me they bought it. I knew the land because I'd grown up here and fished and hunted in a lot of these areas when I was a kid. And they said, we would like to get into aviation. That was literally the proposition. We think this property might be useful for aviation and we want to get into it. And being the trained engineer that I am, I started telling them all the reasons it wouldn't work. I said, oh my gosh, that's going to be hard. It's going to take some time. You're going to have to spend some money. It's a pretty heavy lift. And so they patiently listened to me as I rattled off all the reasons I thought it was going to be hard. And they said, well, we can probably deal with all those things. Let's just figure out how we address those things because we think this is something we really need to do. So I consulted for about a year and helped them write the IPP proposal. We did a lot of things, very extensive work on kind of the regulatory state. We did a lot of analysis there, synthesized kind of what we predicted it would be. And ironically, things are played out almost to the timeline we predicted back in 2016. It's actually pretty much on track there. We won the IPP. And they made me the proverbial offer I couldn't refuse. They said, we want you to come down because this is the start. We want to do more things like this. And we see this as our flywheel. We want to start to do this. And the Choctaws are unique. Tribes are very unique in that they think very generationally. And I've worked for the federal government, the state government, and I've worked in academia, as an executive of a Fortune 500 defense company. And they all look in terms of the next 2 years, 4 years, fairly short term. The tribe thinks in terms of what things will do for their future generations in terms of children and grandchildren. So they have this principle, the 7 generations, the decisions we make, the things we do, what are going to be the impacts down the road? And when I go brief our council, which is the version of our legislature, and lay out plans and lay out what we're going to do, the questions are, what will this do for our grandchildren? Explain how this will help our grandchildren. And so what that's done is it's allowed us to really be almost immune to hype, because we're looking long term. This is a very generational thing we're doing, and it almost insulates us from the hype. So we're on this very consistent marathon pace, and it also allows us to think holistically. So my business unit works just as much with STEM in our schools as we do with FAA. Because we know that we need to be getting the next generation of Choctaw youth ready for this type of stuff. So we have multiple aviation programs now set up in our schools. Part 107 is being taught in a lot of the high schools here. We bring in interns. We give them opportunities to come out and join the flight crews temporarily and actually be part of real operations. So it's very broad in terms of the impacts of what we're working on. But we also see ourselves as a very big potential user of the technology. And that's what's exciting also.
Well, all of it is exciting, and I love this idea of the 7 generation rule. I mean, if the world lived by that, James, imagine what a better place it would be if any of us were thinking, how will this impact our grandkids? Oh
Right.
my goodness gracious, what a concept. Um, and I want to talk a little bit about the uniqueness of the land. Like you alluded to it as we were starting the show. There's 44,000 acres. That you have control over it. But, you know, I'm a lawyer and I actually wrote an article I interviewed you for way, way back when for Inside Unmanned Systems magazine, because tribal law is very unique, very nuanced, and a lot of treaties apply and whatnot. But the land is unique and the control over it is unique. So explain to people why it's unique, what's unique about it, I guess.
Mhm.
And secondarily, then, what benefits do companies and people have in working with the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma on this particular piece of land?
Right. Well, if you look at, well, a lot of the places that we call test sites, there's some designated test sites they don't own their property, and they can't control the ground risk. And ground risk is important because if you look at really the three things that you worry about when you're conducting aviation testing, you're worried about obviously collision in the air. So we have to manage the airspace, right? But then you're also worried about injury or death on the ground, and then collision on the ground. And sometimes those are actually two uniquely different things. So two of the three things you worry about are on the ground. Well, as a sovereign government with sovereignty over the surface, we can pass special laws, ordinances. We can control that ground risk very, very well. And that eliminates a lot of the concerns for risk when we're doing this low altitude aviation testing. We mitigate the air risk by we have multiple layers of radar. So it's a multi-layered approach. We're just 2 weeks ago started extending all of our ADSB receiver network. We have quite an extensive receiver network on our range. We're actually now putting ADSB receivers across the entire Choctaw Nation. So wherever we have emergency management towers or any kind of antenna mast that's permanent with power, we're putting in ADSB. So we're going to be one of the most instrumented places for a lot of these mitigations. And our two radar, one is fixed. It's on what we call bald mountain. We don't have a lot of true mountains in Oklahoma, but it's a really, really tall hill. And so that's where our fixed radar is. And then we have an identical version of that radar that's trailer mounted that we can take anywhere within the nation. We know those things are not necessarily scalable in the future, but we can use them now to be starting to do regular operations. And that is what we need, and that's what the industry needs, is we need places where we can do some sort of regular normalized operations. We desperately need that data to inform the rulemaking, everything from the BV loss rule that's in the works right now, as well as other stuff. So the property is unique because it has so much diversity. Someone can say, I want to simulate some area, and chances are we're going to find some spot that's going to come pretty close.
Yeah.
A lot of hills and valleys have their own little microclimates that it's almost like an urban canyon in the ways that the winds are channeled. So we have a lot to offer on that. And usually what happens is when a company or executives of a company come out, the property sells itself. When they realize the vastness of it, and then they realize what they can do that they really can't do anywhere else, it almost sells itself.
Well, it does, and like I said, I was out there, and you guys actually have a concrete helipad. You have a temporary facility that your ops center, but also a beautiful little tiny house that you've constructed for crews. If people need to stay overnight because they're going to be there for a couple days and they don't want to you travel too far. Just all of the things you have out there and the vastness of it. So before we get to digging into that a little bit more, I do want to give a shout out to Elazar Lebedev, looks like, is saying hello to everyone. And so thank you, Elazar, for dialing in. Appreciate it. And remember, everybody, if you want to ask James something, we had so many questions, James, last week when Maggie was interviewing Mark Hartman in Clubhouse, your ops basically your officer that controls all the different operations that happen on that land. One of them, which I think some of them bear repeating there because not everybody was able to dial in and not everybody will go back and listen to that on demand. By the way, I recommend that you should if you have the time, but if not, let's cover a couple things. One was how do people get to partner with you? Like, I think that's You said IPP again for everybody. It's the Integration Pilot Program. That's over. It's now the Beyond program. Choctaws are still leading at the tip of the spear with that program. How do they have to formally like apply with the FAA? Do they just talk to you? Can they do things outside of the Beyond program on your land?
Yes, and kind of starting with that last question first, we have a mix of partners we work with. Some of those are not even part of the Beyond program. They have no desire to be part of it. They don't need it. They just need range access to do testing. That's typically a lot of defense contractors that we have are doing that because they have no reason to be part of Beyond.
And James, these aren't just OEMs, right? Like people that are making drones. We're talking counter drone. We're talking avionics companies, like radar companies, you name it. If you're affiliated technology that wants to test something, they can use the Choctaws. Right. Okay, got it.
Right. And we typically bucketize partners in terms of OEMs, obviously people who build airframes or build systems. And then we also look at people who support operations, either UTM, aerospace management, radar, they're building sensors. And then some are just operators. They're either needing to train or they need to get, maybe part of their DNR. They need to burn holes in the sky, part of DNR, I'm sorry. So there's kind of that mix, and that's how we bucketize them. But kind of to answer your question, how do they join us? We never presuppose that we know everyone's business case or fully understand, what's driving them to do that. So if someone contacts us with an interest, we always start with, give us a proposition. Let us know what you're interested in, what kind of relationship you're interested in, and let's work from there. So we always let people sort of define what they think they want to do, and then we try to work with that. In terms of Beyond program, it's our call because the Beyond partnership is actually with all the lead entities. Okay. So there are 8 of us on Beyond, and so the Choctaw Nation makes the call on who can join Beyond or not. The FAA just takes our word for it. We say we want to add them. They say, okay. We do have to flow down. So if someone wants to join the Beyond program, we have to basically flow down some clauses. So we do a teaming agreement. So we flow down some of the FAA clauses, mainly on data collection. That as part of the program, we're collecting data and it's being used for rulemaking, things like that. We encourage people, if they can, to join the Beyond program because it does give you some pretty unique access to the FAA, all the lines of business. Through Beyond, you can get very expedited waivers and COAs and things. It speeds that process up. And so we encourage people to, but we don't require that to be part of Beyond. But other than that, we do look for partners who are willing to collaborate. We've had up to 5 or 6 companies all out here doing missions and working together before. And we like that because we see that as the best way to move the industry forward, is that we can all kind of collaborate just a little bit. We're all working toward the same goal. And so we do try that as much as we can. We always want to know, is there somebody you can't work around, because we want to make sure we mitigate problems. We had a very small IPP team, but we had a very cohesive IPP team. And so we were very fortunate to have kept it small and kept it very functional. And basically, we're just looking for people who are earnestly wanting to advance this industry. Then, we get a variety of business cases, and all of them are intriguing. But yeah, we're actually pretty flexible, but we always start with them, So.
That is awesome. And, you mentioned Beyond, right? That's a long acronym, but at the end of the day, the focus is on beyond visual line of sight. And you all were one of the first groups to get a pretty significant BVLOS waiver a few years back. I don't know that people realize that, but Mark talked quite a bit about that. Beyond visual line of sight, everybody calls it the holy grail, right, of the industry. And you alluded to hopefully getting some rulemaking. By the way, James, Michael Robbins from AUVSI and Keely Griffith were on the show last week, and Michael said they had a listening session with the FAA just a few weeks back, and the word on the street is they're not looking until at least February 2024 for an initial rulemaking, which is like, dang it. But I think part of the way to make BVLOS happen in the real world, let's say real world air quotes, is to have some kind of a corridor.
Right.
And, some people find this to be controversial. What are the rules that are going to apply to these corridors? Are there going to be toll roads in the sky? Let's put all that aside.
Right.
Let's talk about the ability to go from point A pretty far to point B without having that drone in your line of sight. Do you have plans for beyond visual line of sight corridor? Because it seems to be kind of the vogue thing to do, right? Like you got Vantas up there in North Dakota, you got New Air saying they're doing a corridor. So what are your plans or thoughts on that?
Yeah, we have a true functioning corridor right now that's contained in part of our test range. It's 6 by 9 miles, and that was where our BV loss without observer waiver was authorized for. But we're working with the North Texas community. We're in an interesting situation because we're in a rural, somewhat sparsely populated area, as you recall. But just across the Red River and the state line is a very large metropolitan area. That's Dallas and Fort Worth. And so the population in our backyard, Dallas, Fort Worth, is literally the equivalent of Arkansas and Oklahoma, the entire state populations put together. That's in our backyard. So we're working on a corridor that follows a natural freight corridor, the Highway 69 corridor that runs through the Choctaw Nation into Dallas. It's a major freight corridor. And the reason I believe in corridors is because that's typically where you have the infrastructure first. It's easy to get ready to do the things. If we need to add things, ensure connectivity, all of the things that we need to do, typically it's going to be easier with a corridor. So our first one would run on that freight corridor. We have this one that's 6 by 9, but the other one will be about 100 miles. We're looking at going all the way from the north of the Choctaw Nation down to Texas. And then we have these kind of arterial type corridors planned as well. So we'll start connecting following other kind of corridors, natural transportation corridors in the Choctaw Nation. And eventually we want to have a network, a hub and spoke type thing where we can have ubiquity across the Choctaw Nation. But it's not a whole lot different than the early days of aviation, areas invested in airports and things, and that's where things happen, but yeah, we are building that out. We do plan the next step between that ultimate Texas corridor and our 6 by 9 that we have right now will be between the city called McAllister and Atoka. It'll be roughly 50 miles. And so that's the next intermediate step. And then beyond that, it'll be the 100-mile and then adding the arterial routes.
So what are your timelines and milestones for these corridors? And then I want to talk about your emerging technology center, which I know is going to be like kind of the keystone of your operations. But
Yes.
what's the kind of the milestones? You have the 6 by 9, as you said already. That was like affiliated with your first BV loss waiver. What's like kind of next up, and about when can we expect that?
Right now, we're actually working with a couple of companies that are doing drone delivery, and so they're using that BV loss corridor. So it's once we reach some sort of consensus between us and that company that, okay, we feel like now we're comfortable. We need enough operations where we see where trivial things are going to go wrong. We may lose link temporarily. We desperately need that data, and the FAA needs that data. So we're going to approach regularity within and normalize operations within that 6 by 9, and then we're going to start to try to replicate that on the other. So I hope within a year, the FAA would like us doing BV loss operations throughout the entire reservation by the end of 2024, and the entire reservation, 11,000 square miles. So their assessment of us is we hear the crawl, walk, run. The FAA has told us you guys are walking really fast. We need to get ready to run. So that they're actually the ones pushing us on beyond to keep doing more.
Holy smokes, you guys are jogging. So
yeah, we're jogging.
Can you talk? I know I have to add my own terminology into the FAA terminology, right? That's going to serve me well in the test next week when I take it. But as can you talk at all about some of the partners you're working with? I know you have some NDAs, non-disclosure agreements with some of them, but some of them are doing really cool things, and maybe this could be a good opportunity to let people know the types of groups that are out there and what they're doing.
Sure. We have several military customers, and as we know, the conflict in Ukraine is really driving fast development with UAS and the military. So we're doing a lot of that right now, supporting them. So obviously, those I can't talk about, but we do have a couple of drone. I can't mention their names either because they're still under NDA. But we have a couple of drone delivery companies, totally different business models, and one of those is actually driving that next level of the corridor because they want to do real operations within that second corridor between the two cities. So we have that going on. Then we have very strong university relationships. We have relationships with the University of Texas, University of Oklahoma, Oklahoma State University. So we're very involved with a lot of the research. Oklahoma State has a really NASA ULI program that we're working with them on. It's actually weather observation. So we have a 1 to 20 COA up to 2,500 feet that we work with them, that they can fly up to 20 vehicles with a single ground control station for weather observation up to 2,500 feet. So it's been
Wow.
very interesting there. But we also have a very strong relationship with NASA. And so we're working on several different initiatives with them. We have a very strong STEM relationship with NASA. We're actually using STEM curriculum within the Choctaw Nation, or NASA curriculum within several of our schools right now. We actually had a downlink, the space station downlink the other day, so the Choctaw students got to talk to the astronauts. It was a really big deal. They were
Cool.
about it. But we have quite a bit going on, so we're pretty broad in what we're doing. And then we have companies that are more looking into the applications, and so they want to get to where they're doing photogrammetry and forage estimation in agriculture and things like that. So it's almost every day is a exciting day, because it's usually something new that we get to be exposed to and support. A big thing that's about to happen is you see the storm clouds in the photo background behind me. This is storm season in Oklahoma. And so we actually have our new operations trailer outside. It's being tested, put through all the motions, because we will be deploying, which we always do, with the Choctaw Nation Emergency Management. So we go overfly, give them situational awareness, and just work hand in hand with the incident commanders and other people like that. So we're getting that ready. I hope we don't have any tornadoes, but statistically in Oklahoma, we're probably going to have a few. So we will be responding to that. And a lot of times we give our video and overflight to the homeowners. They need it for insurance. And so we support the communities however we can. We're going to be testing out some new things this year. If we have some tornado response incidents, we're going to be testing some new gear and some new techniques we have. So we do just a lot of things. Literally, we're open, and this is a sandbox. And so we encourage people to think of it as a sandbox, and we can do things that's not quite possible other places right now because of our ability to accept and manage risk. So we get to see a lot of neat vehicles being developed. A lot of first flights of vehicles happen here. They'll bring their executive team out to watch, and that's pretty neat, when literally the first time it gets in the air is here. So it's just about everything under the sun, and it's, as for a kid that never knew what he wanted to do when he grew up, it's fits with my personality really well, because I get to see something new every day. So.
That definitely makes it fun, and it's not just under the sun, as you said, it's under the clouds. I love that you're doing not just R&D, but real world operations for disaster response and things of that nature. Let's talk, James, about some of these future plans that you have. We mentioned the BV Lost Corridor and kind of extending outside, the Choctaw Nation's lands, connecting with Texas and things of this nature. But you also have a plan for this Advanced Technology Center. We threw up a picture earlier, but I believe we have another, maybe two more. So tell us. Oh, here we go. Tell us your vision.
Well, as you know, when you visited, we have about on the very south end of our test range, about a mile into it, we have about a 4-acre, like we call Phase 0. It's our temporary site where we have an operations center and some stuff and lodging and buildings. North of this, about 4,000 feet north of where we're at with the Phase 0 site, we're going to build a 35-acre permanent complex. And that's where we're building our operations center. We actually, this is the first non-tribal dollars that we'll be using, because we got a very large EDA grant, around $4 million for the operations center. We got a USDA grant. We're building a very large makerspace. We already have the capability to make a space that's just scattered everywhere in all the little buildings we have now, but it'll be a very high-end, literally like a makerspace on steroids. It's going to have some pretty neat gear in it. And then we will be building hangars. We're going to build some initial buildings right away south of that, just because some of our customers need space now. So we're going to build them some like large metal hangars. But you'll see on that one photo, there's looks like a half-finished parking garage. We're working to develop a vertiplex, vertiport research facility, and our belief is that it needs to be reconfigurable, because there's still a lot of unknowns on AAM, about how we design the facilities. Because those facilities, how we design them, can help abate noise and deal with some of the issues that we typically have between communities and aviation. So we think that design is critically important, but we also believe that there hasn't been enough research yet. So we are in talks with people doing some things right now to think about what does a reconfigurable vertiport or vertiplex look like. We're going to build 2 more large helipads. One will be research grade that we can tether and tie things down. And then we already have one functioning full full-scale helipad now. We're going to build a whole lot of drone pads that are like 30-foot diameter, pads that we can do tail setter drones and other things. A lot of those, we're going to be doing things like GNSS reliability, measuring drift. We go do an automated mission, come back, what was the drift? So there's a lot of real kind of fundamental things that we'll be using a lot of those pads for. We've already built out quite a bit of our telemetry. So we have everything from our 80 receiver network. We have a very robust C2 network, multi-band. We have ISM, lower S band. I think we're getting our band license here soon. So it's a pretty capable range, and we're thinking long term. We're trying to be flexible because we know that things like spectrum, a lot of things hopefully will be changing. We did respond to the comments that the FCC had
Right.
for the band,
Yep.
so.
Well, like you said, the 7th-generation rule, you're thinking about advanced air mobility, you're thinking about vertiports and what that's going to look like. I would say that's pretty unique, honestly, because I don't know, I'm going out on a limb here. I'm not really tracking any other test site, shall we say, or beyond program that is doing location
Right.
that's doing these kinds of things. Now, NASA, of course, they've been doing their AAM challenge and a lot of public, discussions and things of this nature. But to actually be building towards, hey,
Right.
what's that vertiport looking like? Boy, I hope you're talking about
Right.
Buddy Rex Alexander. I know the Heli Expo was just recently in Atlanta. I missed that one, but this idea of a drone port, and you're talking about defining regulations. I mean, it's defined nowhere, right? And what should that be, and what's safe and what's not. And same thing with a vertiport. Those engineering brief came out. The FAA's engineering brief came out last year, but it's not really like a final anything. It's kind of like suggestions. So lots of moving parts here. James, are you guys working on UTM as well? Because I mean, okay, so I don't know if you could share that. Clearly, you're talking
Sure. Yep.
ADSB and radars and all kinds of things out there, but UTM is going to be the glue that holds it all together at that low altitude.
And I was actually at the listening session with Michael Robbins. There were about 20 people there a couple of weeks ago, and they didn't give us a sneak peek of the rule. They gave us a sneak peek of what they're thinking. So the FAA basically is kind of, this is what we're thinking based on, we've read the ARC report, we've done a lot of analysis internally. And one of the interesting things that they said is we are considering making UTM mandatory for deconfliction, but we haven't decided yet. So they left the door open, we haven't decided yet, but they did say that they're considering it. We believe UTM is critical, and we've stayed UTM agnostic up until just past 6 months or a year or so, mainly because we didn't see a clear path yet. There were some bad signals that were sent to industry when remote ID had the broadcast standard, not the network. That really
I'm laughing because it's like bad signals, no pun intended, right?
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
And it pulled the rug from a lot of UTM companies because it sent a really bad, indication to their investors on that. Right. And NASA's done a great job on it. It goes back to something fundamental, and as someone formerly DoD, you'll appreciate this, and that is, historically, we had a very strong triad of aviation technology development. The DoD was a major driver; they were the vanguard, and then NASA was kind of parallel, and the FAA was a recipient of it.
Yep.
And there were a lot of gaps. The military would mature things and get a lot of understanding about it. That's been totally upended with electric propulsion and drones and things like that. It's happening in industry.
It really
and what
is.
it's exposed is this massive gap between NASA and the FAA. When NASA, as a science agency, is able to call it good, the FAA is nowhere near ready to adopt it and use it. And there's this valley of death that we're seeing in some of the technologies. And so we desperately need to bridge that valley of death for UTM. We either need to...
And I agree, James, and to jump into this too a little bit. And then you have the DoD, right? They always had these technology transfer authorities. I mean, not always, but for a very long time. I feel like it's the 1950s.
Right.
But now you're seeing groups like AFWorks, like Defense Innovation Unit, like SoftWorks as an example, out there really beating the bushes, if you will, with industry and saying, bring this stuff to us because we need it. Again, it was always out there, was always happening, but it's just so much more visible. And you use this term maker spaces. you know, they're like in Vegas, they're in Austin, they're in really non-traditional Silicon Valley, I believe, non-traditional locations, really trying to get industry, as you said, who's out there on the forefront, moving light years pace ahead of other people, to be like, hey, show us what you've got,
Yeah.
and we'll figure out if that's something, you know, kind of we can use. So really, really interesting the way this is kind of evolving, but definitely technology is way ahead of regulations. We've known that. I think that's been probably for all time, but just with Moore's law, it seems to be accelerating in a pace where it's like, here's technology, here's the regs, right? Like, so we'll see how that all goes. But you know, you're right. Like UTM is critical, and I love what Europe's doing with U Space. I don't know why we're not taking, you know, why we can't just swallow our pride for once and say, hey, these guys over here have something really good, let's borrow that, instead of
Right.
saying, well, we have to be different, you know, like, or we have to be first, because we're not first now. I mean, that's
No,
the
we're not.
bottom
No.
line.
And you know,
Yeah.
the Agility Prime was, you know, a brilliant of all the government players, some of the neatest thinking that actually happened in the Air Force, because Agility Prime was almost this recognition that we can't quite, you know, we can't just jump in and start doing the same things and catch up very quickly. So why not bolster our U.S. industry,
Yeah.
put our money there, because we'll use that technology, we'll get it, but we'll also bolster that and improve our economic security, which is becoming just as important as our national security
Well,
sometimes.
it is, and like, you know, that's why those statutes, technology transfer, exist for the military. And I agree with you. You know, the Air Force. By the way, those AFWorks guys, they broke a lot of glass. Like you can in the Pentagon, as you can imagine, people's heads were exploding. The lawyers are like, "What are we doing? You know, you guys are leaning too far forward." But it's like, no, like if you want to have a competitive edge in today's world, and all you have to do is now fast forward right to where we are today. Look over at Ukraine and Russia and be like, told you so, you know, like this is happening, and we still need to, you know, we're still playing a little bit of catch up. So really interesting times we live in. But taking it back, I think we have a really cool image of maybe this future building that you guys are visioneering. Tell us about this.
Yeah, this is going to be very holistic. And this will be the center of our operations. So we'll have a
Wow.
telemetry room, a pretty advanced telemetry room in it. That's where our offices will be. So we'll have our offices there. We'll have observation capabilities. A lot of times, executives or the leadership of a company wants to come see a first flight or an early flight. So we want to make that a good experience so that they can do that. But I've been very purposeful in making sure we have space for STEM. We host a lot of schools here, and I want to have classroom space where a school can come out and have lessons for a day. You know, bring sack lunches or whatever. They come out for the day, they see operations, and then we can help them with curriculum on kind of intro to flight 101, the physics of flight, or you know, have a day on weather observation using drones or something. So we're very into that. We some of our biggest supporters of our program within the reservation are the school superintendents and the STEM coordinators. They love it. The kids
Yeah.
hear about it, get exposed to it. They come to school excited and want to learn. They want to talk about it and ask questions. So STEM's going to be a big part of it. We do want to be the kind of starting ground for a lot of the manufacturing, because we ultimately we want to be a player in that larger ecosystem. And I believe that the manufacturing footprint for AAM, if we begin to realize the scale that a lot of us are hoping for,
Yep.
that manufacturing footprint does not exist yet, and in a lot of ways, it's up for grabs.
I mean, James, you saw just recently Archer announced they're out in Georgia, right? And they're affiliated, I feel like University of Central Florida, if I recall correctly. That's where their origins, you
Mhm.
know, kind of began.
I was there UCF last week, actually. So
Okay, okay, so you know what I'm talking about, and you're right. You know, but you see Detroit making a grab, right?
mhm.
Stellantis partnered with Archer, so you're going to see some of these automotive companies looking around, saying, you know, can we do it here? Do we need to do it somewhere else? You've got the space, and by the way, everybody, you know, at first when you were like, yeah, come out here, I was like, wow, is that going to be a slog? But super easy. No, it wasn't. Super
Yeah.
easy flight into Dallas, like super easy road trip, like not long. I feel like 45 minutes or less to get to your location. You know, so really perfectly, I feel like, you know, it's out there insofar as there's the space, airspace and land, but it's also close enough to so many things that it's actually convenient. So I feel like you've got the best of all the worlds right there, James, and what you're doing. So keep doing it. Yeah, I hope you know I've been a super fan from day one.
Thank
Uh,
you.
my my first Forbes article, actually my test article or whatever they called it, was about the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and James gave me so much information for that. So I'm really thankful. But
A
we are
very good article. Very
yeah,
good article.
well, it was easy to write because it was all about all the amazing things you're doing, right? So we are getting really short on time, and I want to make sure that I didn't miss anything, James, that you wanted to make sure uh, people heard, that they knew before we dialed off. So please, 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 what did I miss? What do you want to tell people? What's new? What's next?
Well, I like to tell people what drives me to do this. I'm toward the end of my career as an engineer, and I'm excited. The engineer part of me is excited about all this, but there's something more fundamental that drives me, and that I serve as also a transportation commissioner for Oklahoma. So I have oversight of our roads and bridges. And having spent my career in aviation and then having this career broadening experience getting into ground transportation, I'm just amazed at the risks we have on the ground, the fatalities we have on the ground. But also, I'm very distressed about the state of our ground transportation network. It is in bad shape. And when I look out on the horizon, we can't continue to build out our ground transportation infrastructure the way we always have. We've always linearly scaled, added lanes, added highways, and that
Right.
is so disruptive to everything from the ecosystem to communities. We can't keep doing that. And so I see that there's this mounting pressure that the cost of upgrading and getting our roads to condition or expanding is so great that building out the infrastructure we need for AAM or drone delivery, those things like that are going to be a fraction of that if we look at what we have to do. And I believe that there will be a societal shift where we say, why are we allowing 40 to 50,000 deaths a year on the roads when we've gotten an aviation system where we've gotten it down very, very low, and we're really figuring out how to make aviation safe. We're not doing that on the roads. And so I believe that that type of societal pressure, at some point, there will be a turning point that we say, why are we accepting that? We're getting this safe, quiet technology that can make things a lot more convenient. We can actually begin to bridge those inequities that we've always had between rural areas and urban areas.
Right.
And in the United States, still, it's the 21st century. We still, our lives in terms of our health outcomes, our access to opportunities, our access to education, a lot of things are still driven by your zip code. Your zip code
Yeah.
is a big indicator of what you're going to be able to do and how long you're going to live a lot of times. And I believe that one of the last areas where we haven't bridged and created equity, we've done it with communication. We've just almost gotten internet everywhere where everyone's connected, which, opens up educational opportunities, e-commerce and things. One of the last areas is transportation. We've never democratized aviation, and we've
Right.
never been able to have that big transformational. The automobile 120 years ago was the last time we had a major democratization event happen in transportation. That was
Right.
a major event, but that was 120 years ago. And I believe that the way our cities grow, the way our cities organize, the way we live and plan our lives will be dramatically changed if we can fully realize AAM. And we can do it in a way that doesn't sacrifice or make our national airspace system unsafe. We can actually make it safer. I'm convinced that we're going to make our airspace system much safer by pulling in this type of technology. We're on that track. So.
Well, I love your vision of the future. I love the Choctaw Nation's 7 generations philosophy, and I'm so glad that you are at the helm of this because we need people thinking along those lines, and clearly you are.
Thank you.
We are about 2 minutes out, James. So, how do people reach you? How do they get in touch if they want to plug into your efforts there in
The
Oklahoma?
easiest way is if you go to www.cnoaa, so cnoaa.com. That's a website about what we're doing here. We have some contact forms and addresses there. Or just jgrimsley at choctawnation.com, just all one word, jgrimsley at choctawnation, all one word.com. But yeah, we love to hear from people, and we tell people, bring us a proposition and let's talk about it. So very glad to be here. So I appreciate the opportunity and always enjoy working with you, Don. We've had great conversations and always very inspiring conversations. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. And James, is there anywhere that you are going to be any event coming up where maybe people can meet you in person?
Probably the next one that's abroad will be Exponential, I believe, in Denver this year. So we'll hopefully be there walking the floors and getting to meet people and stuff. There are a few more. I don't think they're public yet. There may be some intermediate stuff between now and then that's still being organized. But I plan this year to get out to more conferences. We're going to speed that up a little bit. I want to get out and visit more, and I get excited seeing that. So.
Awesome. And Elazar is saying, thank you very much. Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody out there watching today and in the future, because I know we're going to get a ton of views on demand. So thank you, James. Thank you to the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. And we will watch with bated breath with everything that you continue to do. So that is all she wrote, everybody. We are out here.